Welcome, ghostly travelers, to episode 12 of the RV Canucks podcast. Because we're feeling the chill of fall settle over most of Canada and we're getting close to Halloween, we are detailing 5 of the most haunted places we've ever camped. And stay tuned to the end of the show when I share a bonus story about which island in Ontario Dan and I both refuse to go back to. It's not a camping story per se, but it is a travel story, and it's a really weird one at that. So if you're new to the show, welcome. I am Melina, and together with my husband Dan and our tween and teen, we are the RV Canucks, a motley crew of Canadian RVers who travel North America far and wide and bring back tips, tricks, and stories from the road that help you see more of this great continent as weekend wanderers and part-time RVers. You can follow our adventures on Instagram and Facebook at RV Canucks, and if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts, we would really appreciate if you would leave us a review on Apple and let us know what you think of the show. Sadly, Dan is away this week on business, so you're stuck with me regaling you with all of the ghostly places we have stayed. I actually wanted this to be episode 13, which would be next week for obvious reasons, but I guess if you include our podcast trailer, this is technically the 13th episode, even if it doesn't say so on the description. So I guess it's kind of like in elevators of high rises and old hotels where there's no button for the 13th floor. In actual fact, according to records held by the Otis Elevator Company, who my grandpa actually worked for, an estimated 85% of building elevators don't have a named 13th floor. But before we get into it, I actually want to share a really quick best tip for sightseeing when you're super short on time. So we've done a lot of traveling, like for business and stuff, where we might be in a city for 24 hours. Like you have a very, very short amount of time to see a city in one evening. And my best tip, and it's very apt to mention it on this episode, but my best tip is to take a ghost tour. So whether you're in like London, England, or Washington, DC, or Toronto, Ontario, or some tiny little town in the middle of nowhere, usually there's some sort of historical society that runs an evening ghost tour. And these we have found are fantastic ways to really get the history of a place in a very short amount of time. You know, like a half an hour long tour will give you all kinds of insight into the actual history of the town, which are intertwined with some of these really interesting stories about some of the people who used to live there and have died there. And it's a really good way to see a city if you're super short on times. That's one tip I always love to give people. And with that said, let's get started. We are going to start down south in Florida with the St. Augustine Lighthouse in the city of St. Augustine. So St. Augustine itself is actually the oldest city in America. It was founded in 1565 by Spanish explorers, and it has its own storied and bloody history. And it's also one of my favorite places on the planet to visit. So there's so many ghost stories about it. It's hard to know where to start. But since this episode is haunted places we've camped, we're going to take you 1 mile from the ranger station at Anastasia State Park to the St. Augustine Lighthouse, which is on the north end of Anastasia Island. So the current lighthouse that was there was built between 1871 and 1874. There was a lighthouse also previous to that, which was built in 1824 and was billed as Florida's first lighthouse, but that's a little bit misleading because as territorial governments who have had control in Florida, mainly Spain and Britain, there have been a series of lights and beacons along the coast since like 1565. So St. Augustine Lighthouse, it is a beautiful building, very, very tall, black and white striped, kind of candy striped up the lighthouse. So there are apparently several resident ghosts who take up residence in the St. Augustine Lighthouse, one of them being Peter Rasmussen, who was one of the first lightkeepers of the current lighthouse. And Peter was known as a man who was very meticulous about maintaining this lighthouse and the standard to which it was kept. So naturally, people say that in death, he wanted to continue watching over the lighthouse. And Peter was known as somebody who was an avid cigar smoker, a very distinctive cigar. A lot of visitors, not even knowing about Peter, will report that once they visited the lighthouse, they'll report smelling cigar smoke during their tour, which is interesting because the building is obviously no smoking. But that's something that seems to follow the spirit of, I guess, Peter, who is said to still roam the property, keeping an eye on it. Second is the ghost of Joseph Andrew, who was one of the other later lighthouse keepers. And he actually fell from the top of the tower while painting the exterior of the lighthouse. And it has been said, and it has been observed, that Joseph stands at the top of the lighthouse tower. And if you actually Google St. Augustine Lighthouse ghosts, there are a ton of images, have a look, have a Google. You can decide for yourself if you think they're real or not. But there is a ton of images where there's supposedly captured on film images of a man standing on the edge of the lighthouse rim at night. So keep that in mind, because at the end of the episode, when I talk about our island experience in Ontario, it does have something to do with a photograph. So keep that in mind as we go on. And more tragically, and probably most famously, there is apparently the ghosts of two little girl sisters who haunt St. Augustine Lighthouse. And that is the ghosts of Eliza and Mary Pitty, who were daughters of Hezekiah Pitty, who was hired in Victorian times, the late 1800s, to maintain the lighthouse or to renovate it. And they were apparently playing in some kind of a cart that was used to ferry materials back and forth from the work site to wherever they were loading materials. And apparently the girls hopped in this cart, which broke away from the building and hurtled down into the bay. And neither girl could swim, and they both perished in a watery death. So apparently you can either see the ghost of Eliza, who floats around the grounds, apparently in the same blue dress that she died in, or you can hear the laughter of two girls coming from atop the tower late at night. So aside from that, and these are reported mostly by staff members who have worked the tower, but apparently there's music boxes in the gift shop and they turn on by themselves, which gives me the absolute creeps. And as you'll see with a lot of ghost stories, the tower door, when staff members will lock up, they will close and lock the tower door. But in the morning when they come back, the tower door is always left open. So that is apparently probably how Peter Rasmussen likes it. So maybe they would just be best to leave that door open at night. So definitely worth a visit. St. Augustine, we will do probably a full episode on it because it is, like I said, one of my favorite places to visit. And there is just so much history and so much information there about the town. So we will leave St. Augustine and we will travel north to Canada, and we will talk about 3 Ontario provincial parks worth visiting, who also have pretty creepy stories behind them. So the first is Selkirk Provincial Park, and we actually have a park guide to that on our website at rvcanucks.com. We visited there actually for the first time this August, and apparently the ghost of Captain William Francis, who was an American loyalist. He fled from America to Canada, and he was actually awarded 200 acres of land in 1800, I guess in return for loyalty to the crown. And part of that parcel of land is where Selkirk Provincial Park sits. So when he was in America, he was a quartermaster in the King's American Dragoons before coming to Canada. And what he ended up doing was he ended up carrying intelligence for Governor Simcoe under the guise of being a horse trader during the War of 1812. Well, he was captured during the war by American sympathizers, and he was actually taken to Buffalo with his son. And there, William and his son testified against others, presumably, I guess, to be let off the hook and to be able to return home. However, in 1814, he was rounded up by a gang of friends and supporters of those that they testified against in court. He was shot in the head through his bedroom window and his property was burned. It was razed to the ground. So his son was not home at the time. So his son kind of escaped that fate. However, they did find him, and his charred and burned body was buried under a pine tree on the bank of Spring Creek above the house, which is within the park boundary. So his remains are still there, but some do say on a foggy day, you can see him where Spring Creek meets Lake Erie. I can kind of attest. We went down there one night, late at night on our last night, to really have a look at the creek and take some of the backwoods trails through there. And I gotta say, it was super creepy. I'm not going to lie. I don't have anything visual to report, but I will say, you just like walk in a place and you get a feeling where you're like, I don't know that I should be here right now. Definitely had that feeling at Selkirk Provincial Park. So, take that for what it's worth. But from there, we're going to move on to Inverhuron. So Inverhuron is less of a ghost story and more of a ghost town. And this is probably bar none our favorite park to camp at, hands down. We love it. Dan's grandparents owned a cottage on Lake Huron in Inverhuron. And, we've pretty much spent the majority of our marriage camping there. It's a fantastic park, tons to do, lots of history. And you would actually never know unless you were looking for it that Inver Huron was a bustling community. It was settled in the 1840s by a Scottish immigrant named William Gunn, and it kind of became a booming town. It had a school, it had a library, the first library in the county, actually. I think it had something like 39 volumes of books, which is fantastic for back then. It had a post office, it had a couple of mills, it had a 600-foot pier. Estimates on how many people lived there varied, but some were up to about 500. In April of 1882, fire struck the grain houses and the pier. And, a lot of these structures were wood. It wasn't uncommon during the time to have some of these fires. However, arson was highly suspected, but it was never proven. And after that, the town, stumbled on. Some fishing operations opened up, but the pier was never rebuilt. But then shortly thereafter, in 1887, the entire town virtually burned to the ground. And by 1901, it was essentially a ghost town. So a few buildings remained. However, the shifting sand dunes, which are on the coast of Lake Huron, kind of just slowly reclaimed those buildings and foundations. And there was a yellow brick schoolhouse there, which did remain standing, but it was torn down in 1990. So the old town, the entirety of the old town actually sits within the boundaries of the provincial park. And there's also a pioneer cemetery there, which dates back to the 1850s. And it was overgrown and forgotten for years. And actually, that was the case with the entire provincial park. So the park was actually closed to the public in 1973 because of concerns from the neighboring nuclear plant who was producing heavy water. And the heavy water plant closed, it ceased operations in 2000. So the park opened back up eventually, but not until 2005. So basically from 1973 to 2005, the entire provincial park, as well as the town, was a ghost town. In 2005, the park reopened. It's a fantastic place now. They've actually just in the last, 5 or 7 years, opened up a third camping loop in this park. So I highly recommend it. You really, really, really have to go look very, very closely for evidence of the old town. So sometimes you can still find the odd yellow brick in the sand dunes that belong to the schoolhouse. There's concrete markers throughout, but you have to kind of walk back into the sand dunes. You'll find them underneath trees, kind of half overgrown, and the concrete markers are stamped with the home sites of who lived there and what building was there. And it's just a really fantastic place if you love exploring ghost towns and really looking for evidence of the past. Probably one of our favorite places ever to go. So from there, we're going to head to southwestern Ontario and we're going to go to Bronte Creek Provincial Park, which we also have a park guide on our website at rvcanucks.com. And go check that out because there is some great pictures of the places we're talking about here. And namely, we're talking about the Spruce Lane Farmhouse. So the Spruce Lane Farmhouse was built in 1899 and it was home to the Brecken family until the 1950s. And this farmhouse and accompanying barns and paddocks and whatnot sit in the day use area of the park. Interesting side note, my mom's aunt was actually born inside that house. So it's not at all relevant to the story. Well, maybe it is, but she's been dead a really long time. So I can't verify with her any of these stories one way or another. But now this house and barns and whatnot are used as an interpretive center and a museum which focuses on Victorian farming. So the park offers tours, they offer field trips, but it also offers evening ghost tours during the month of August. They do it at about 8 or 9 at night when the sun is setting. They light the house with kerosene lamps to kind of give it that eerie authenticity that makes it feel like you're stepping back in time. And what can you expect to find there? I don't know, maybe nothing, but there are several reports of occurrences from visitors and staff alike that will send chills down your spine. One of them is that several visitors report that in the upstairs bedrooms, they'll pop their head in, and you know how they usually have like ropes around where you can't walk fully into the room. They'll see kids in there playing hide and seek, and they'll like turn around and be like, what? Like, what are these kids doing behind the rope? And then they'll turn back around and the kids are totally gone. Several staff members additionally, we talk about like doors opening and closing a lot. So there's a door to the smoking porch from inside the house, which staff members will come in. If the house has been closed up, they will throw open all the doors and windows and just kind of air it out. They'll go downstairs and change because they're clothed interpreters to the time period. And they'll come back upstairs and that door that was open will be closed and it will be locked. Or the opposite, they will close it and lock it at the end of the day, and they will go upstairs and they will, make sure all the windows and doors and whatnot are closed. And then they'll come back down and that door is unlocked and wide open. So the smoking porch door is consistently the opposite of the way it's set. There was a maintenance worker in there who reportedly one time had the dining room table. It's usually set so you can kind of see what a table setting would look like back in the day. And so he had removed all of the dishes and they were stacked on the floor, and he had flipped the table over to work to fix a leg. And he said that he was just like absolutely overwhelmed with fear. And he got this feeling like the house was like angry at him because he had taken the dishes and put them on the floor. And he basically finished the work like lightning fast. He turned the table back over. He like set it and tried to make sure that it was like exactly the way it was when he walked in. And then he left and he refused to go back for like a week because he was just like, yeah, no, I'm out of here. Did not like that feeling at all. It's interesting because I know in terms of the house records, Henry Brecken, who was one of the homeowners, he died in 1931. And as is typical for the time, he was laid out in the parlor for several days during his wake. And I'm sure with like several other members of the family that, you know, dating back to 1889, that was just common practice to kind of lay people out and have family and friends come pay their respects. But the Victorians believed, like they were a super superstitious bunch. They actually believed that when somebody died, you had to cover up the mirrors with some kind of fabric or something because it was believed that spirits of the dead would get caught in the reflections of the mirrors and it would result in haunting. So who knows? Maybe one of the covers on one of the mirrors slipped off at one point and there is a couple of spirits that haunt the Spruce Lane farmhouse, but we shall see. I don't know. If anybody takes a visit or if anybody's been there, please like leave us a message and let us know what you thought if you got the creeps when you were over there. I know I certainly did, but I get that a lot. So one other interesting point about Bronte Creek, and I've mentioned this on one of our other podcasts when we talked about camping in the park, is that behind the Spruce Lane farmhouse is the Half Moon Trail, which actually snakes its way down 115 feet into the bottom of the gorge, which is where Bronte Creek actually is. And the town of Oakville actually lets you scatter ashes on the Half Moon Trail, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. And I think it's really cool for people who have a history or fond memories of that park. And it's a different feeling than that kind of ghostly Spruce Lane farmhouse type of feeling. Like when you're walking through the Half Moon Trail, I don't know, something about it, like you just kind of have this like feeling. It's the same feeling I get when I like walk into a cemetery where it's hallowed ground, it almost feels like, right? And I was feeling that when Fiona and I were hiking in it this summer, and I came back and I actually didn't see the sign stating that ashes were allowed to be scattered there until we were on our way out. And I was like, that is so funny, because I was feeling that way the whole time. Like it just felt like hallowed ground. And I thought, oh, well, it's, you know, God's bounty. It's like a beautiful locale and it's, you know, shady, and it's just a stunning place. And I just thought it was funny when we came up and I saw that sign, because it totally made that feeling make sense. So that's the roundup of the 3 Ontario parks that we have visited this summer and often that we like to go back to. And that's their stories. But I added a 5th one just because this is also one of my favorite places. And this is in Pismo Beach, California, which is in Central California. And the reason I love this is because these 2 stories are like so vague, but it's like these vague ghost stories that I grew up with on the West Coast of like, ooh, it's a dark night and you'll see a traveler on the road, but he will disappear in the headlights. And it's kind of like these just weird, vague traveler stories that I love to hear. And it reminds me of the campfire stories we told growing up. So the first is that there, of course, it's California. There's a ton of piers up and down the coast, and I'm sure there's probably resident ghosts on all of them, but there is a ghost, a very visible ghost on the pier at Pismo Beach. So a lot of people have said, and I was reading one account of somebody who was taking a picture in December. So there's a Christmas tree there, and they went to take a picture of the Christmas tree with the pier in the background, and they put the camera up to their eye, and somebody was walking down the pier, and they were waiting for them to kind of get out of frame so they could have this beautiful shot where nobody was on the pier. And then so they waited so long that they took the camera away from their eye. And when they took the camera away from their eye, that person was no longer there. And when he put the camera back up to his eye, he could see a figure walking out of frame. So totally nobody there, could only see this through the eyepiece of the camera, which I think is just fascinating and lovely. And finally, there is apparently a man and a young boy who haunt the Highway 41, just out on Pismo Beach. And a lot of people say they see this man and this child walking down the highway late at night, and people will pull over and they'll be like, yo, do you need some help? Like, is your car broken down? And every time somebody stops to talk to this person, their eyes are dead ahead. They don't acknowledge you. They just keep walking. And there was one account of a group of teens who came across this, and they pulled over to kind of see if this guy needed help. It was really late at night, and this kid is small, and they were a little concerned. So they pull over and started talking to the guy, and we're like, what the heck, man? Like, why aren't you acknowledging us? And then they just they stopped after this man just kept walking past them, and they all looked at each other in the car, and they're like, what? And then they look back out the front window, gone, completely gone. But the funny thing about this story is the person who wrote this said that her brother, years later, was driving down the same road late at night, and he saw the exact same man and son, exact same clothing, everything. And as I'm telling you this, I'm getting goosebumps on my arm. Probably not the show for me to be doing by myself right now. But I just think that is the craziest story. So yes, that is the roundup. That is the Halloween roundup for you, which I don't know. I love stuff like this. I love kind of seeking out really cool, neat, haunted or supposedly haunted locations, just because I think there's a lot of really cool history attached to them. And I just think it really enriches the travel experience to be able to see a lot of these. So with that said, I want to tell you a story of something very specific that happened to Dan and I. And this was back on our 5th anniversary. So we've just had our 18th anniversary. So this was some time ago, but we decided to head up to Kingston for the weekend, Kingston, Ontario, which was about 3.5 hours of where we lived at that time. And I had never been there, and I just knew it was a fascinating place. There's a lot of history there. It was kind of like the hub of Upper Canada back in the day. And it just looks like a beautiful city. So I thought, okay, we'll just do a nice bed and breakfast for our 5th anniversary. We'll drive up there. It's September, it's fall. We'll enjoy the colors. It's great. And so I tried to find us the coolest, fanciest bed and breakfast, which was in the heart of Kingston. However, it was sold out. So I found the second coolest, most awesome bed and breakfast, and it was on Wolfe Island, which is just across the channel from Kingston. So you actually have to take a ferry to get there. And I booked it sight unseen. I was like, wow, this place looks amazing. It's such a huge mansion. It's awesome. So I booked it, and then I thought, oh geez, I booked it, I paid for it. It was a big anniversary surprise. And then I thought, as soon as I booked it, and I thought, oh crap. I hope that it doesn't have awful reviews. Thought, okay, I want to make sure that we're getting quality here. So I Googled it as soon as I was done booking it. And literally the first thing that came up was, haunted Canada. The Wolfe Island Manor is one of the most haunted places in the country. And I was like, okay, awesome. And then I was like, okay, well, maybe I should cancel. And then my inner voice was like, no, don't be ridiculous. Don't cancel. It's so silly. It's a bed and breakfast. So when you go to a bed and breakfast, the person who owns it lives there. It's fine. There'll be other guests. It's not a problem. So Dan and I roll up, and it was still light out at this time. It was, the sun was starting to fade. It was probably 5:30, 6 o'clock at night. And we show up, and we were greeted at the door by the owners of the bed and breakfast. And this was a Friday night that we got there. We were staying Friday night, Saturday night, and we walk in, and it's massive. It's beautiful. And it's right behind this old Catholic church. And this huge manor house used to be the rectory for the church where the priest would live. And we walk in, and we're greeted, and they're a really cool couple, really neat. And they show us around, and they're like, okay, so if you need anything, we live in the house out back. And they had built themselves a separate house behind the bed and breakfast. And they're like, okay, so you're the only guests in the house tonight. You have the whole place to yourself. There's another couple coming tomorrow night, but for tonight, don't worry about it. You've got everything right here. And Dan and I just kind of both look at each other, and we're like, okay. And then they left. They went back outside to their house. So we did some walking around, and we actually took the ferry back over to Kingston proper, and we got dinner, and we did a ghost tour because, like we said, it's a fantastic place to start a historical deep dive into the city that you're visiting. So we had a great dinner. We caught the last ferry back, and there's basically I think there was one street light on the island. We got off the ferry, and there's one lonely little light on the dock. And that was it. The rest of the island was super dark. And this was we didn't have fancy phones back then with flashlights. So we walk up the dock, and then everything is pitch black. So we are basically feeling our way back to the house. And we walk into the house, and Dan's like, well, let's go up to the Widow's Walk. There's this Widow's Walk up at the top of the house that they've built. But to get to it, you have to go through the creepy attic up to the Widow's Walk. So we go up to the Widow's Walk to get photos. And we are halfway up the Widow's Walk stairs. So we've gone up through the attic up to the Widow's Walk stairs, and I realize I forgot my camera, and I want to try to take some pictures. So I run back downstairs, which was a terrible choice. And I know that I saw something in that attic on my way back down, and I grabbed my camera out of our room and I ran back as fast as I could. And Dan says that he heard noises in the attic when I was clearly on the floor below that, which just like gives me the heaps because Dan does not believe in any of this kind of stuff. So we go up to the Widow's Walk. It was great. We had a nice time. We're just going to go back down and tuck into our room. Even though we could have explored this whole house, we were just not feeling the vibe. So we go down into our room, which was massive. It was huge. We had floor to ceiling windows in this room and not one window covering. So you kind of felt like something weird was just like standing outside these floor to ceiling windows and staring at you. And I kid you not, like I just felt like we were being watched all night. Like we didn't sleep a wink, and not because we were doing other stuff, but we didn't sleep a wink. And we woke up the next day and we sit up in our room and we go to the back of the room and look out the window, and there's a cemetery like directly outside, like underneath the window. So I was like, oh, well, that makes sense why I felt like I was being watched by 1,000 different spirits, because there's literally a cemetery out there. So then the next day we walk around the property. We're just taking nice pictures. It's beautiful. And when we got home and I downloaded the photos from my camera, there was definitely a face in the attic window, and I'm not even kidding. And I showed it to somebody at work and they just like could not believe it. And now I have to find this. I have to find this photo, and I will put it on our social media when I find it. And I think I've since put it on like an external hard drive where I've put old photos. So I'm going to dive through and try to find this photo, but I kid you not, like I think about it now and I still, I can't even. This place is crazy and the whole island felt weird to me. So yeah, that was our experience with Wolf Island, and we're probably never going to go back there. But on an interesting note, and one thing we did discover during this ghost tour of Kingston is that somebody was on the tour who grew up there, and he was kind of saying there was a park in the other end of town that used to be a cemetery. And the town at some point decided that they wanted to exhume and move all the bodies out because they wanted it to be a park in the middle of town. So they started exhuming bodies, and they actually found that there was like 5 or 6 or 7 bodies to a plot when there should have been 1. And it turned out when they went back through the records that they discovered there was some kind of like crazy sickness, influenza type respiratory illness, and they just had this mass death rate. And to keep up with it and keep the disease to a minimum, they just started opening up existing graves and just dumping bodies in. So the town decided, instead of to leave it as a cemetery, they left all the bodies there, and basically they knocked down all the tombstones and they put like 6 inches of topsoil on top, and it is now a park. So we actually found this park and we could see, and this guy who was there, who grew up there, said, I remember that. Like when we were kids, we used to like pry up old headstones and we used to use them as bases to play baseball. So it was kind of a cool thing. That's like a great example of how you can see some of these ghost tours and get some cool histories. So that was kind of neat. One more thing I will mention before I sign off on this creepy crawly episode is I'm going to mention to you Road Trippers. Now I talk about this all of the time. We know that it's my favorite app. I plan every trip with it, but one of the great things I love to use on it is the extensive filters. So when we're going somewhere and we're planning a trip and I'm feeling particularly in a creepy mood, I will filter down for abandoned places and haunted places. And when I do that, I find some really cool little places along our routes that we can stop, or maybe in our destination cities. But there's actually, being October, there's a ton of trip guides on there, which are pre-made trips from people who use Road Trippers. Then they can make their trip guides public, or there's blogs on the Road Trippers app that will take you to like real haunted places. Like if you just Google, Road Trippers haunted or Road Trippers ghosts, you will see all of these really cool trip guides that you can take, which will give you travel times, it'll give you maps, it'll give you directions, it'll give you reviews, photos. So there's one that I'm looking at now called Real Haunted Places, and it's America's top 20 real haunted places that you can actually visit. So places that have tours that you can go inside. So if you are feeling it, if you really want to take some time this fall and winter and look at places in Canada, all over the US, where you can go and do some creepy tours, if any are open in these COVID times or plan for next year, I highly recommend checking out Road Trippers. As always, Road Trippers allows you a free account. You can put up to 8 way stops in there, which are fantastic locations that you want to pin, that you want to visit on your trip. If you want more than 8, you can sign up for Road Trippers Plus. It is $29.99 a year, and you can put up to 150 waypoints. And and I use it, like I said, extensively. I spend all winter at my computer planning trips for next year, and we are going to do a doozy of a trip next summer, which will take us all of the way to Vancouver on the West Coast. We're hoping to go up to Alaska and back home through the Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and back down, maybe even catch some of the Dakotas as we loop around home. So we're still deciding on those final trips, but I will definitely share that trip guide with you when we're done. If you're interested in trying out Road Trippers Plus, we do have a coupon code on the show notes for $5 off, so you can get the whole shebang for $25 and give it a try. It's definitely worth it, but check out the show notes for that coupon code that's specific to RV Canucks listeners. So with that said, I hope you all have a lovely Halloween. I hope wherever you are that kids are still able to go out trick-or-treating, but if not, maybe you can sit around and regale your kids with some of the stories we've talked about today. And if you have any of your own, please comment to us on Instagram, send us a message on Facebook, send us an email to hello@rvcanucks.com and tell me your encounters. Tell me your stories, because I love to hear some of this stuff. And if you have great stories, I'll share them with the listeners and I'll put them on our list for the next time we head to where you're at. So with that said, thank you so much. Dan will be back next week. I'm sorry you didn't get to hear his lovely voice. I know we all miss him here a whole lot. And we will talk to you next week when we start our 4-episode journey down Route 66. So you don't want to miss it. We will talk to you then. See you later, guys. Bye.